According to the writer, Tower of God is a story that uses tests and games to establish a bigger storyline. And such is the case in episode 3, where a lot of branching plot elements are packed together. The test with the doors was especially indicative of this, as it gave us great insight into Khun's past. But as usual, that alongside Yu's character and other minor things could be explained in greater detail. So let's do as we usually do and continue looking at what the anime changed or skipped from the Tower of God webtoon. Episode 3, The Correct Door, covering chapter 12 to chapter 16 of the webtoon. We begin with a flashback that gives us our first look into Khun Agano's past. Something that could have been a little bit confusing given that they were referencing multiple different characters and key events in such a short period of time. The gist of it was that Khun unknowingly betrayed his branch of the family, all while getting betrayed himself. You see, the Khun family as a whole is made up of several different branches, each branch being attributed to a different wife of the main head, Khun Agano's father. Now, Khun was expected to assist the Agnes branch by helping his full biological sister become a princess of Zahad, an affair over which he had great influence. It was something that needed to be done in order for the Agnes branch to succeed. But one day he was approached by his half-sister Maria, a daughter from a different branch of the Khun family. She displayed all sorts of kindness and selflessness. She made it seem as if she was the one who was most fitting to become a princess of Zahad. And it was these displays of compassion that turned Khun against his very own sister. He ended up abandoning her, then chose to manipulate the selection towards Maria's favor, inevitably leading to her being chosen as the princess. But as soon as the selection was over, Maria abandoned Khun. Not only that, but because his full sister from the Agnes branch didn't become a princess, the branch in its entirety was dismantled and exiled. Khun is now plagued by the memories of his failures and the nasty rumors that were left behind. And it's through these rumors that we establish an idea of who Khun was before all this. He was a very clever individual, but that cleverness also brought forth conceit. Those around him felt that Khun acted as if he knew everything. Who knows whether it was out of something like fear or envy, but they couldn't even bear to look him in the eyes. This could have all just been an act though, a mask that he was putting on so that he could fulfill his duty to the Agnes branch. As SIU has pointed out in the past, Khun may very well be the most human out of the three main characters. Though he tends to act all tough, in actuality he is very sensitive. That was likely the part of him that Maria was able to take advantage of. Khun had one job, and he let himself be deceived out of fulfilling it. It's what brings him down this path of loneliness that Baum now finds him on. Now, when we switch back over to the examination room, we see Baum learn the true nature of the sky. What he was seeing was nothing more than an imitation created by Shinsu, and the moon that came out at night was simply a manufactured ball of light. Neither the sky nor the stars actually existed within the tower. In fact, Khun honestly didn't think that they existed at all. To him, the only thing at the top of the tower was the roof. Now, the test that they were in line for had already been going on for some time now. Khun was already analyzing the situation long before Mr. Neon Bag had even entered the scene. He noticed that only 3 out of the 10 teams before him had passed the test, assuming that the screams of death meant failure anyway. This was later confirmed by Mr. Neon Bag, who had a bit more reasoning behind his claims of time being the key factor. You see, the screams were the only noise being heard from inside the test room. If the administrators truly intended for everything regarding the test to be hidden, then he would have prevented the other teams from hearing the screams as well. This fact alone made the screams itself a clue, and the logic behind that hypothesis was reasonable enough for even Khun to accept. But being a test case for Mr. Neon Bag wasn't something that he was planning on doing, though he didn't overreact and try to kill him like we saw in the anime. Mr. Neon Bag didn't even bring up anything about Khun's past. Khun simply left when it was their turn to go and do the test, the conditions of which were pretty much as we saw. Take longer than 10 minutes and fail, or open the wrong door and die. Khun actively sought a logical answer to the problem in front of him. He rigorously searched for any sign of a hint that he could use. But the thing about this test was that the hint was already given. Khun just chose not to trust the person giving it. It was a lesson that Yu wanted to teach Khun directly. He knew Khun's past would cause the hint to serve as a detriment instead of an asset. As he was now, Khun only acted when he was certain of the outcome. This test created a situation where that certainty wasn't there. Unless all the hints were taken into consideration, a leap of faith needed to be had. And that's exactly where Khun fails to act. This was a fact that the test served to highlight. That, as well as the importance of having teammates. It's after this that we get to see a lot of the other teams take the test, giving us a bunch of different perspectives on how it could be approached. First, we had Concho's group. Much like Khun, Concho didn't believe he had all the clues at his disposal. That's when Chopin says that he'll use the prophecy of God to find the right door. Supposedly, this was one of his personal abilities where he connects to his god and receives divine instruction. Of course, it wasn't actually that. All Chopin really did was make a wild guess based on unfounded faith. Next was Ho's group. Lore was sleeping as usual, which, as you'd expect, pissed off Serena. Even though they were in the middle of the test, all Lore wanted to do was just continue to sleep. But because Serena was complaining so loudly, he couldn't. His initial response was to just open any door. The thought process being that because no hints were given, it didn't matter which door was opened. To him, every door offered an equal chance of success. He then called Serena an old lady, which, as you'd expect, she didn't take it very well. So, after beating him up a bit, she took his blanket and pillow hostage and told him to solve the test. Of course, this was extremely annoying to Lore. He just wanted to get the test over as quickly as possible so he could go back to sleep. So, what he did was just open the door that was closest to him, passing the test without any thinking involved whatsoever. The last team that we got to see was Shibasu's, and his was the only one that approached the test perfectly. You see, Shibasu took all the 3 hints he was given and came to the only logical conclusion. The screams, the clock, and the fact that there were no hints all dictated that a door needed to be opened within 5 minutes. And that was something that Shibasu alone figured out. He finally proved that he could be somewhat useful to his team. Now, after all the regulars were tested, we have a scene where Yu explains why he had Mr. Neon Bag give out the hints. The reason was because of the different effects that it would have on different-minded people. Khun almost failed because of his innate distrust in others. Had he not received the hint from Mr. Neon Bag, then he probably would have been able to figure out the answer on his own. On the contrary, Shibasu took all the hints into consideration and formed a reasonable conclusion based on evidence. Chopin decided to rest his group's fate on his false faith, and Lore used his annoyed state of mind to come to a quick solution. Clearly the hint had a different effect on all. It was something that Yu liked to compare to a cup of tea. To some, the tea was medicinal, but to others it turned out to be poison. And even if that tea was in fact intended to be medicinal for all, the person who received it still had to choose to drink it. That was the only way to verify that the tea truly was what it was said to be. In the end, it didn't matter whether the hint was useful or not if the person receiving it already decided that they weren't going to use it in the first place. That's why the hints were given to them by Mr. Neon Bag. It added that unknown element. Next we get to when Quant administered the first and second tests to the new group of regulars. He was the type of admin that didn't like the boring stuff. So to make things go by a little bit faster, he initiated a 30-minute survival game to trim out the initial group. Out of the 200 regulars participating, only 3 of them were left at the end. A team of which we learn that Quant finds out consists of both an irregular and a princess of Zahad. This was quite the precarious situation, because if Quant knew that there was a princess and an irregular, then he shouldn't have carried out the test in the first place. Quant was supposed to check the background of each of the candidates. That was standard procedure for the preliminary tests. But since he didn't, it meant that it could lead to a lot of trouble, especially if Evankel found out about it. This wasn't a situation that someone as strict as her would easily dismiss. That's why Quant was begging Yu to come up with a plan. Now, although Yu seemed as if he was angry, that may have just been a facade. You see, later that day Yu was laying in bed putting on a kind of mischievous grin, almost as if this whole situation was something that he had planned from the beginning. That was the kind of face that he was showing here. We then switch over to the waiting room of the next test. There were just over 20 teams left from the previous one, so only about 60 to 70 regulars remained. It's here that we see Khun leave to go to the washroom while Shibasu introduces himself to Baum. Their conversation leads to the topic of their motivations for climbing the tower. We learn that Shibasu promised a close friend that he would make it to the top, whereas Baum just mentioned how he needed to find someone. The thing is, with no clue as to where this person was, Shibasu felt that this goal may be a bit extreme. He understood that the inner tower was far too huge to track down a single person. It was a concept that an outsider like Baum couldn't quite fathom yet. So when Shibasu made it seem as if Baum's goal was out of reach, His words didn't go so far as to dishearten him, but instead motivate him more. Baum made it clear that he intended to find Rachel no matter what. It was a level of determination that Shibasu knew that he had just insulted. So rather than leave him with the pessimistic words he just said, he instead gave an apology and left with a few words of encouragement. The next scene that we get into begins the crown game, a more complex version of King of the Hill. It's interesting to note that the way the participating teams were brought to this area was through what's pretty much teleportation. Letado refers to it as being transmitted. It's how the teams are removed from their rooms and placed into the game when they push the button. So, instant teleportation seems to be a concept that exists in this world. Now, for those of you who didn't quite understand how to win the game, there's a few key rules that need to be noted. The first is that the game is 5 rounds. Each round is 10 minutes and only 5 teams can participate at a time. The primary objective for each team was to steal the crown. Once a team has it in their possession, they then have to choose a member to wear it and sit on the throne, at which point the round is immediately over and that team wins. That same team then moves on to the next round where 4 new teams can participate and fight for the position on the throne. The catch is that once the crown wearer sits on the throne, they can't leave. If that person steps off of it or loses the crown, then their team is eliminated from the test and the round is over. This goes on for 5 rounds, and the team that has a member wearing the crown on the throne at the end of the 5th round is the winner. Now, the general consensus of the game was very similar. Going into the first round would be far too dangerous. Even the knight and little girl that we briefly see in every episode had the same idea. Holding the crown for 5 rounds straight would be way too difficult. Shibasu's team, on the other hand, thought the opposite. Both Anak and Hats believed that 50 minutes was more than enough time to take on every person in the room. Even though Shibasu figured that the best plan to guarantee success was to go from the 4th round, he knew that his teammates were far too impulsive to just sit still. All 3 of them truly believed that they were the strongest team in the room. So it's not like he didn't expect them to be out there from the first round. I mean, to them, the test didn't even seem that difficult. And the first round really wasn't, as Anak single-handedly took on an entire team. Quant compared it to being like meeting a creature from a different world. When Chopin attacked her head, it wasn't the impact that hurt his hand, but instead Anak grabbing his arm and crushing it with her grip. Quant's group really was outmatched here. So when they tried to completely ignore her and instead go for the crown, they were all hit back by a single swing of her whip. It wasn't a mini cyclone like we saw in the anime. And because it wasn't that, Baum didn't see that Rachel was in the room across from him. He doesn't even realize that Rachel is there until much later into the crown game. But yeah, that's pretty much it for episode 3. We got to see a bit more into Khun's past and learn a few extra details on characters who may become more prominent later in the story. Now, I'm thinking for next week I might combine episode 4 and 5 together so that we can get closer to where the anime is. So expect a longer video next time. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!